Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name's Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with...
Dr. Kimberly Plonk. I am a bioarchaeologist. I study the human skeleton, health and disease, and evolution.
And I'm Dr. Russ Barnett, paleogeneticist interested in Ice Age animals.
And today we have a silent film double feature because they're each about 25 minutes long. We are reviewing the Charlie Chaplin film, His Prehistoric Past from 1914, and the Harold Lloyd film, Clubs Are Trump from 1917. Do you want to do these one after the other? Start with Charlie Chaplin in chronological order?
Sure.
Yeah, makes sense. Why don't I do the His Prehistoric Past and Kim could do Clubs Are Trump? Does that sound sensible?
Yeah.
All right.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, well, it's nice. I've never watched any Charlie Chaplin before, so it was good watching this to reassure me that I've not missed anything, really.
I think this is a bad example of Charlie Chaplin.
I think so, too.
I've seen Charlie Chaplin stuff before, and it's pretty funny. This one is not great.
No. But anyway, so it's Charlie Chaplin in his sort of tramp persona, his kind of most famous, recognizable image of the bowler hat, the moustache, and the walking cane, I guess. And it starts with him just sleeping on a park bench, classic tramp behavior. And then it kind of does this sort of classic dream shots, or the aperture kind of closes and then opens again, and now he's having a dream where he's going to be the king of Waikiki. I think that's what it says on the
that's what
title.
it says.
Yep.
Of course, Waikiki's a real place in Hawaii, but this is clearly not Hawaii that they're filming, and these are clearly not Hawaiians that they're interacting with. It's meant to be, I guess, some prehistoric past, so I don't know why they've singled out Waikiki. Anyway, there's lots of people dancing in leopard skin, lots like a whole kind of harem of cave women, very modestly dressed in a kind of off-the-shoulder leopard skin outfits. There's a big boss who's got a sort of mighty club, and the tramp is sort of off to one side. He's having a little think. He's also dressed in animal skins. He pulls some of the fur off, dumps that in his pipe, and uses a sort of stone as a match to light it. I
like that part. That was cute.
Amusing, I guess. Yeah. He meets some of the cave ladies, cave women, and flirts with them. And while he's flirting with them, not the big boss caveman, but a sort of secondary caveman who's also quite butch, comes along and shoots him in the butt with an arrow while he's flirting with the woman. And so he goes through the motions of not being perturbed by having an arrow sticking out of his gluteus maximus, and continues to flirt with her. But he can't sort of hide it any longer. So he shows that he has an arrow in his butt to the woman, picks up a stone, throws it towards the archer that shot him, but it accidentally hits the king on the head. So that's not great. The archer chases the tramp and the woman, and they all end up going round and round the same rock. Like, just seemed like forever. Just keep going round and round, sometimes changing directions. And that feels like something that would have been funnier in the past than it is now. Yeah. But then the king kind of comes along and joins in, so now they're all running around the rock. The archer guy accidentally stabs the king with an arrow and gets clubbed on the head. And then it kind of cuts to, there's like another title card where it says now they exchange cards, which seems to be just like little bits of leather. I'm only imagining that back in even sort of, I guess, Edwardian times, that's when this was filmed, certainly in Victorian times, the classic way of kind of introducing yourself was not to say anything. It was just to hand your card over, like a business card, saying who you were, what titles you had, whether you were important enough to be bothered with in such a kind of class-ridden society. So there's the funny business of the tramp and the king kind of exchanging their cards, which are little scraps of leather which would make sense for kind of Edwardian
I thought
Stone
they were
Age people.
leaves.
Yeah, maybe it's leaves. Maybe you're right. Maybe it was leaves. Some kind of organic material, anyway.
Yeah.
Then they go off. Now they've been introduced. They go off to the king's tent. They have a drink. The tramp decides that he should kind of mix things up a bit. So he takes the drink he's been given and starts shaking it like a cocktail, and it kind of goes everywhere. While this is happening, the archer who's been bashed on the head by the king at the stone, he wakes up, and so he's now part of the action again. The tramp meets more of the women. They go to see the archer. He gets clubbed. The tramp and one of the cave women start to play in the waves because they're beside the beach. That's nice. He has tea with the king again. Hangs out with some of the cave women. There's dancing. But while he's dancing, the king's not happy, I think. I mean, it's really difficult to follow this. I mean, it must have made sense in the 1917 time.
Mm-hmm.
But for a kind of modern Western person, I mean, we're only sort of separated by a century from this, but the narrative that I'm assuming is very difficult to follow. So that makes it complicated. Anyway,
I also kind of felt like we were missing scenes.
Yeah, quite possibly. Or they might have been in the wrong order. Who knows? Because I guess these are all kind of on sort of short reels.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so the king gives the tramp bow and arrows while he's flirting with one of the cave women, with the idea that they should be going hunting. I think they're kind of friends now, and they want to go on a kind of friendly hunt together. And we see a kind of amusing shot of a chicken in a nest way up a tree. How it got there? It must be a wild prehistoric chicken, I guess. So the tramp's not very good with the bow and arrow, but he shoots at the chicken, and the arrow goes into the nest. But I don't think he hits the chicken. And while the king is looking up to see where the arrow has gone, a whole bunch of eggs fall on him, which is quite amusing. I mean, that's a classic gag, having an egg fall on your face. And then the tramp goes back to the girl that he's been kind of wooing. I think he starts to kiss her. The king gets angry. They're beside a cliff. So the tramp pushes the king off the cliff. And now Charlie Chaplin is the king. So he's in charge. He can command this kind of harem of cave women. But while he's off enjoying his new kingdom, the archer finds the king and helps him climb up the cliff again. And while the tramp is in the king's tent, enjoying a nice kind of afternoon with all these cave women, the king sort of sneaks up on him, takes a big stone and smacks it on his head. And then the tramp wakes up and he's back on his bench again. It had all just been a dream.
Yeah, and it was a police officer hitting him on the head with a baton.
Yeah.
Well, do we have anything we want to say about this one specifically, or should we summarize the next one and then talk about the strange similarities between them? They're very much, they follow a very similar plot.
I think we can talk about some of the things in this. So, I mean, there's it's 1917, so this is the earliest we watched with the classic caveman trope of having clubs and hitting women over the head as a kind of courtship device. So, this goes back.
But their clubs also had nails sticking out of it.
Yeah, that was
weird.
Metal nails in sort of
like
Stone Age times. That didn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. But you know what I thought was interesting is that they're not actually hitting the women over the head in this one. They're hitting the men over the head so that they can take over the harem of women.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes a lot more sense, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And in the next one as well, in both of them, the next one is called Clubs or Trump. The whole point is hitting people over the head with clubs in the next one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of hitting. And what were you going to say, Kim?
It was a long time ago. That's okay.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it very much something that's not really very common in comedy today, I think, is the idea of kind of violence as humorous. So, a lot of the humor that's supposed to be in this film is from fighting, from hitting people over the head, falling down cliffs, that kind of stuff, which is really kind of fallen out of fashion, I guess.
Yeah, like the slapstick humor. I mean, It reminded me a bit of the Three Stooges type of idea, right?
Yeah, I guess they're a kind of missing link between kind of Chaplin times and kind of modern comedy. I mean, even the kind of what we think of as kind of gross out slapstick humor today, so like Farrelly Brothers sort of stuff, doesn't really go in for the idea that violence is funny. It has to be accidental, I think, to be funny. Whereas here, it's very deliberate.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really not a lot of. They clearly didn't have a kind of archaeological assistant on this film to kind of make things appear realistic. I mean, that's not the point of the film, clearly.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make any kind of archaeological sense, even for 1917.
This is the first time that we saw a female cave person wearing a straw skirt instead of fur. I liked her outfit.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, this one's a little weird because the king is king of Waikiki Beach, and all of the women are wearing grass skirts. And I was wondering if, like, they're just sort of conflating, indigenous Polynesians with cave people because they don't have any, like, there's not that much cultural knowledge of what cavemen are maybe at this point, right?
Yeah.
And even less cultural knowledge of Hawaii.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, less cultural knowledge of every other culture on Earth.
Yeah.
So you take something you have a glimmer of, like, oh, these people don't have electricity. It must be like caveman times, must be the same thing. Or like, I don't know how to explain the weird Hawaiian stuff otherwise, right?
Yeah. He seemed so uncomfortable in his fur suit too. He kept, like, it was part of the comedy that he kept adjusting it, but it was quite funny.
I feel like we're missing a lot of cultural stuff because he's got some like scraps hanging from the back, and whenever he's flirting with a woman, he's sort of twirling around these scraps on the back of his furs. And is this supposed to be like a tailcoat that he's flipping the tails on his tailcoat or something?
I don't know,
is that a thing that Charlie Chaplin does?
When he went to talk to her and had his back to his back was facing the camera, he wasn't really flicking it like a tailcoat as much as if it were insinuating being turned on or something, like an animal tail, right?
Like
he's wagging his tail.
Yeah. That's what I got from it.
Do you know what we do have? This might be the oldest movie we'll ever do. I think maybe there's like the Gertie the dinosaur animation, which might be older if we end up doing that.
Fair.
But right from the beginning of caveman movies, we have this joke about this anachronism of your main character caveman wearing modern day stuff. Like, so Charlie Chaplin has his bowler hat and his little mustache and his cane and his pipe. The one we tried to watch last week and then we didn't finish was National Lampoon's Homo erectus, and the main character has regular glasses. The what was that play called? Firebringer. One of the characters, Emberly, wears very Stone Age looking glasses.
Right.
And I feel like there's maybe been a few other movies where we have a caveman who's sort of meant to be out of place in his time, and they show us this by having him wear glasses or some modern clothing that would be weird in that time.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it also makes sense because it's his dream, right? So it ends up making sense that he'd still have his bowler hat and his everything because it's his dream.
Yeah.
What a strange dream to have. I guess all dreams are strange.
Yeah.
What a strange dream to have twice, because it turns out in the next movie, the plot follows a pretty similar course.
Yeah.
Do we want to cover the next one, review the next one now, and then we'll talk about some similarities between them and some maybe general stuff?
Sure.
Yeah.
So this one is Clubs for Trump or something. Ugh, I hate that word now.
Clubs are Trump.
And
yeah, it's weird, right?
So it opens up similarly. There's these two guys on a park bench in a park, and on all the park benches there seems to be couples, a man and a woman paired. One of the pairs, so the man is treating the woman really terribly. He has his back to her. She can't talk to him. He's just being a huge jerk. Everybody else seems okay though, happily in love and talking with each other. And these two guys decide that they want a girl too. So they become sex pests, which I think is really the only way to describe them, and go up to the women on the benches who are sitting there with their men, and then try and chat up the women
in conversation.
Yeah.
I actually thought this one was quite funny compared to the other one. I thought it was very funny watching these two guys actively hitting on women who are actively in conversations with their boyfriends and then getting beat up for it.
Yeah, and then so the boyfriends, would yell at them, beat them up for it. And then when they finally got to the bad man's thing, I think that's where he really beat them up. And then they finally give up trying to get a woman, so they go and sit on another bench, and then they find this magazine that has a picture of cavemen and a cave woman and the cavemen with clubs. And so I guess they get this idea in their head, and then they lay down on the bench and just go to sleep together. And then they wake up and they're cavemen. So they're in the fur Roman thing, what's it called? Just that fur thing wrapped around one shoulder, the regular thing, and
toga.
The toga, yeah, the fur toga. And then they they realize that they're in caveman times, and then they watch and they see that there's a caveman and a cave woman, and another caveman comes up and hits the caveman, the other one, on the head with a club, and then just takes the woman, and she seems fine with this. She just goes with whoever is conscious, I guess. So they watch this a couple times, and they realize that if they want a woman, they just have to club a guy on the head. So they get clubs, and the ones that the guy dropped when he was unconscious. And then they start trying to club guys on the head to take the women. And then, it's this whole hilarity ensues, Three Stooges type thing, where there's just men hitting men on the heads with clubs, women being moved from one man to another. There's a ton of men come in. All of this happens. And eventually they get quite a few of the women, don't they? But then the men come and beat them up. I kind of forget what happens at that point. And then you think that the movie's over, but then they wake up, and should be where it ended. And they wake up from their dream, and then they think, well, if clubbing worked in our dream, then it must work in real life. So then they start to, first they assault a police officer. So there's a fight with them and the police officer, and they get him trapped in a tree, and then they assault him and stuff. And then they go back to the park benches where there's the men with the women. And then they start to fight the man. So first they fight the asshole man, bad guy. He is about to hit the woman, and then all the men come to stop him from hitting the woman. Then he beats up all the men. And it's again just that hilarity ensues, men beating each other up, clubbing them or whatever. Eventually, somehow, through all of this, because the men are so busy fighting each other, that the two guys, the two sex pests, end up getting all the women. And they leave with all the women down into a field, but then all the men come after them, and then again there's more fighting, and then they hit the men with clubs, which sends them into this weird trance, and then they can just play with their bodies and put them in positions because they're in this weird trance, and then they take the women again, and then the bad guy comes down and wakes up the men from his trance, and then the cop gets out of the tree because another cop helps him, and then there's a bunch of cops that come after the sex pests, and the women run away, and then there's a group of cops chasing the sex pests through the field, and then they run through what looks like a training camp for military or policemen. So then there's a huge fight between that group of policemen and then the group of policemen chasing them. So then the guys, they are able to escape because of the kerfuffle, and then they get into a canoe, and there's a bunch of canoes on a lake. So they get into a canoe, and then all the policemen get in canoes, and then there's a canoe chase where they're all trying to chase the guys. Then they get out of the canoe, and then they hide, and then the policemen come, get off the canoes, and they run past the guys hiding because they don't see them, and then it ends. Did I miss anything important?
We should say this is the key. Was it called the Keystone Film Company? So these are the classic Keystone cops, where you have all these cops in those tall helmets.
Yeah.
And it's all played in fast forward. So this canoe, this rowboat chase is comically fast, rowing around in the lake.
Essentially, they're just following each other in circles. Yeah. So it was very much in the same way that if you're the most violent or the most aggressive gets the woman, right? And it doesn't seem to necessarily be against the woman's wishes. They seem to be fine with it. They just go with whoever pulls them in their direction.
Yeah, so we have again this same trope of in every caveman movie since then, where your romance is done with a club, and assuming that that's what the past is like.
Yeah.
There's also a bit in this one where I thought they were tramps. I thought it was that kind of derivative of the Charlie Chaplin one, that they didn't even bother to change their characters. They were just two tramps sitting on a bench.
Oh, maybe.
But they're fighting over one woman, and then they essentially toss a coin to decide.
Oh, right. Yes, I
who
forgot
gets
that.
her.
Yeah. But then that doesn't even matter, because then they get chased away, right?
No.
Yeah. So instead of... Because they were trying to club each other and it wasn't working, and so they tossed a coin. Yeah. It's all very misogynistic. Everything seems. But otherwise, I mean, the movies were almost the same.
I mean, they even have the same kind of running around a big rock
Yeah.
for far too long.
The Charlie Chaplin one at least had music, though. So that made it easier to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the music accompaniment would have been played by someone on a piano in a
theater.
Theater at the time. So I couldn't find a version of this one on YouTube that actually had music to accompany it that was sort of synced with it. And for some reason, the title cards were only in French and Flemish. Which my French is good enough, but I don't think you really need to have been able to read the title cards to understand what was going on. They didn't help that much.
No, I don't think
or
so.
to not understand what was going on.
Yeah.
So I don't know that much about the silent film era, but in terms of Charlie Chaplin, he's doing his tramp character, but this is 1914, which is the year he started doing films, and he did 35 films that year for the company he's working for. I can't remember which one it was that he was working for at the time. Yeah. Which is more than we do podcasts, by the way. We do 26 podcasts a year. He did 35 short films in his first year. And obviously this is one of his earliest films, and it's not very refined. Like I've seen a few Charlie Chaplin things in other places, and
he directed it too.
He's
right?
very good at physical comedy. Did he direct this one?
I'm pretty sure he did all of his own directing.
Oh, it says it did, yeah.
And editing and composing, and he was a bit of a control freak.
I mean, in other stuff, he's very good. I agree that this one was pretty bad. The second one, Clubs or Trump, stars Harold Lloyd and Snub Pollard, and I don't know that much about either of them either, but Harold Lloyd has a character, his glasses character, which he's more well known for. If you look for, if you search for him online, you'll find him in these like sort of round glasses. But this is an older character called Lonesome Luke that he's playing in this one, which apparently is his less famous character from before he developed his more likable character later. So this is a less likable character that he's playing apparently.
The eyebrows were creepy.
Clubs or Trump, also directed by Hal Roach. And this is not the first Hal Roach movie we've seen, because he was the producer of 1 Million Years BC. And also associate producer, uncredited, on 1 Million BC, the 1960 whatever remake of it.
Interesting. So he liked his caveman stuff then.
It seems like it, or maybe people were just so prolific in the first half of the 20th century that out of his, whatever, like 300 or 400 movie credits, he happened to stumble upon cavemen a couple of times.
There's very little archaeology or paleontology in the second film. I mean, there's not even dinosaurs or extinct creatures in it like we see in some of the later films.
Yeah.
The only things I saw that could possibly be called archaeological are we see one of the main characters trying to start a fire with a hand drill, like a bow hand drill, which is interesting.
Eventually successfully starting that fire, too.
Yeah. And setting the king on fire. And then there's also a kind of rolling quern for milling grains, which they're kind of banished to. They get sentenced to hard labor for trying to steal the princesses, and they basically have to do. I mean, it's like Conan the Barbarian's Wheel of Pain. They have to basically just push this quernstone round and round to crush the grains, and that's real, I guess, sort of Paleolithic technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably not quite in the time when people were draping themselves with leopard
No.
skins as clothing. There's probably a gap between that when they would have had much more refined, tailored clothing and more agricultural tools by the time they're crushing grain with a giant round stone, though.
So if this is the oldest movie, like, there's not very many movies before this, right? Like, when did movies start?
No, like, I don't know what the first movie is, but, like, this is... 1914 seems to be the beginning of both of these guys' movie careers.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm just wondering, like, where the trope with the club, like, where did that come from? Like, I was just assumed it's from old movies, but if it's in the first movie, where did the trope start, right? Like, did they start in comic books or stories or what? Because I always just assumed, like, the trope started with the old movies, but if it's already, this is the first movie with cave people and they're clubbing each other on the head for women, where did this idea come from?
I think you're right. It does start earlier in kind of, I hesitate to use the word literature, but in books. So I was reading an interesting article on JSTOR, the repository of academic papers, about how far back it goes and how a lot of these tropes, are kind of crystallized back then. The idea of wearing furs and clubbing each other over the head stems back to, mid to late 19th century, where you have the kind of confluence of ideas around sort of scientific racism, kind of progressivism, and just not good understanding of what are at the time the new ideas of evolution by natural selection, the discovery of Neanderthals and things like that. And you have a lot of people just going really nuts and kind of also I guess the idea of civilization, essentially the idea that things are continually getting better and better, and so if that's to be the case, then things in the past have to be bad to show people today how much better they have it, and so it kind of comes from that. But it would be interesting to see some of the stories that kind of set up what is, I guess, nearly 2 centuries of stereotypes.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That we're continuing to have to fight against.
Like, somebody just imagined it happening, a caveman hitting somebody with a club on the head or the head, and then it's just like a persistent thing that's just lasted.
Yeah. And then now you're Victorian and you're Edwardians who say, look how good you women have it today. You may not have the boat, but at least you're not getting hit over the head.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have anything on our watch list that's older than 1914, but one of the things that I always think about when we're watching these really old movies is the state of paleoanthropology at the time and what had actually been found. And so I was trying to put together a bit of a timeline of human fossil discoveries, which is really hard to do because if you search for human fossil timeline, you just get like a chronology of evolution, of evolutionary like species and stuff.
Or creationist timelines, I'm sure.
I actually didn't stumble onto any of that accidentally yesterday, so that was pretty nice. But basically in 1914, I think we've been over this a few times, but there were 3 human species, well, actually 4 human species other than modern humans that had been named. And so we had a pretty good sample of Neanderthals by that point. The first skeleton that was found that we can recognize as not a modern human in our sort of like the history of the actual science of studying human evolution was in 1829, and that skull is Angus 2, which is a child's skull of a Neanderthal that was found in Belgium. And Angus 1 is a modern human, so because it's a child, it's hard to determine, species affiliation with children because they, vary from adults. So it wasn't recognized at the time that this was not a modern human, or like it wasn't really recognized that not a modern human was even really a thing. In 1848, they discovered a Neanderthal skull at Gibraltar, which they definitely recognized was very weird. And then in 1856, they found the what would become the Neanderthal type specimen in Germany. And so that's the one where they finally named the new species Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis. We have a few old modern human stuff found in between. So in 1868, we have the Cro-Magnon skull discovered. In 1886, we have more Neanderthals from Spee in Belgium. In 1891, we have the first Homo erectus specimens named, which were found by Eugene Dubois in Indonesia, and he named them Pithecanthropus erectus. In 1908, we have the Mauer mandible found, which was named Homo heidelbergensis, so that's our third species, and still two of these are only represented by a small number of bones, right? Pithecanthropus and Mauer and Homo heidelbergensis are only from one site. And then we have some more Neanderthals. 1908, we have the old man from La Chapelle aux Saints. 1909, we have La Pharisee. These are both in France. 1912, we have Piltdown, which turned out to be a fraud, which is a very interesting story. And I don't know if we've told the whole story, but we could tell that one. And then we have 1914, and I don't know if I'm missing any major finds here, but like this is basically it. We've got a pretty good sample of Neanderthals. We've got one example of Homo erectus, one example of Homo heidelbergensis, which is a contentious species today, and then also Piltdown, which they named Eoanthropus dawsoni, which at the time they thought was a real species. And then in the midst of this, La Chapelle is found in 1908. And Marcelin Boule made a famous reconstruction of Neanderthals based on La Chapelle. But the problem with La Chapelle is he was an old man with arthritis and most of his teeth missing. And so Marcelin Boule reconstructed him very slouched over and ape-like. And there's a famous drawing of this. I can't remember who the artist was of the drawing. But probably this reconstruction the reconstruction was made in 1911. Probably this is influencing a lot of the caveman tropes we see moving forward in the films that come shortly after that, I would imagine, right?
Yeah. I think there's also reconstructions of Pithecanthropus or Homo erectus from the Javan material that Dubois found. And certainly they went nuts with reconstructions of Piltdown Man as well, I think.
Yeah, the Pithecanthropus material is only a skull cap, like from the eyebrows backwards, and a femur, and a couple of other things, I think, maybe a couple of teeth or something. So, I mean, you can be a little gracious when we're assessing their interpretations of these things, because they didn't have any face to go on.
There's the Piltdown Man.
Yeah, so do we want to tell the story of Piltdown Man in case we've never told that on this podcast before?
Is there a Piltdown Man movie?
I don't think there is, and that's a shame because that would be a really good movie.
Or even like a retelling of the whole thing. So it's found in Piltdown, which is in Sussex, southern England. And so this is well after Origin of Species has been published. You have the kind of movement towards scientific archaeology and understanding of humans and their evolutionary place in nature. You have the discovery of Neanderthals and Homo erectus, and everyone sort of recognizes that these are human-like, but quite different from modern humans. And we have this really, I think, blinkered thinking. I think we're mostly free of it now, but the idea that for every gap has to be filled, and so you have to find something that's, well, okay, we found Neanderthals and humans. What's halfway between Neanderthals and humans? Yeah, that's great. That would fill that gap. But actually, that just creates two new gaps. What do you have between Neanderthals and your link, and then your link and humans? Very human kind of thinking. But they dug up this skull and a jawbone, and also some stone tools at this site, and put it all together and said, "Here we have the missing link. This is the ancestor of all humans, and he's an Englishman, by God, as he should be." And there were clues there that maybe they were having their leg pulled. So some of the tools that were excavated were like a stone cricket bat.
the most English
thing possible
in this whole fraud.
But that didn't happen, and so it was sort of believed for, I think, like 20, 30 years, just because there was a lack of good scientific criticism.
To believe it.
Exactly. But the science worked. People were doubtful of it, and they did some tests, and they saw that actually someone had filed down the teeth on the jawbone because it was from an orangutan that had just been sort of stained.
Yep.
And the skull cap was old and kind of weirdly thick, but it was only medieval and had been stained as well. And so someone had basically pulled the wool over their eyes. They'd been punked, essentially. And so to this day, we don't really know who did it, who kind of planted these fossils to be found. Thankfully, I mean, 20, 30 years isn't that long in terms of the damage it did. I mean, they're still, creationists love Piltdown. They like harp on about it all the time. But actually, it's a success.
It is, yeah.
It's a fake that was found out through the scientific method. We can't control for people trying to fool us, but we can control for accepting the reality of the things that were shown. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much it. There's been all sorts of. I remember going to talks by Chris Stringer at the Natural History Museum with suggestions for who was behind it, and all sorts of names have come up. I think Arthur Conan Doyle was at some point mentioned as being a potential conspirator. A.S. Woodward, all sorts of Charles Dawson, even the guy that the Piltdown fossils were named after. He was a suspect, but they've never been able to pin it to any one individual. I'm
surprised it didn't come out in someone's deathbed, right?
I thought that we had pinned it pretty securely to Charles Dawson, and the question was anybody else in cahoots with him, or did he do it on his own? Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the reasons why the mystery has remained so long is that these fossils were found in 1911 to 1912, I think, and Charles Dawson died in 1916. And so I think that if he had lived longer, it would have, he would have had time to slip up. But I believe Charles Dawson is the one who found all of the fossils, all of the finds. He was, I think there were a couple of different times they found fossils. So they found some first and then they found a few later. He was the only one involved in both discoveries, and he had access to both sites beforehand. And so I'm pretty sure that it had been decided that very likely he was the mastermind behind it, if not the only one involved.
Yeah, makes sense.
So the question was if anyone else was working with him or not.
Yeah, and we see that sort of the same kind of situations arising today. So there's been recent cases where scientists have been misled by fake fossils. So you have cases where there is a massive market for fossils in places in China, and paleontologists will go and pay local people to bring them finds. And of course, as soon as you involve payment, then there is an incentive for more spectacular fossils to be created or to be kind of added to. And so I can't remember the name, but there is a fossil, in the past 20 years, which was incredible, but it turned out to be two different fossils put together.
Interesting.
And thinking of one recently in my own sort of subfield, there was a paper, a very high impact paper published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences a few years back of a fossil cheetah from China, which was a kind of a link. I really don't want to use the word link, but an ancestor of a common ancestor between kind of modern cheetahs and pumas, which are related but have a fairly poor fossil record. And this was only later on, after kind of X-ray analysis, found to be a composite. So some bits were real bone, but a lot of it was just kind of artificially made to look like bone. And so that paper had to be retracted.
Interesting.
There's also a really well-known Paleolithic archaeology hoax from Japan where one researcher, Shinichi Fujimura, had been faking discoveries for, I think, decades, and was really well known in Japan as one of the most prolific archaeologists for finding Paleolithic stuff in Japan. And it turns out he'd been faking most of it for his entire career. And so that was a big thing that sort of blew up when they discovered that, I think, around the year 2000. But yeah, Ross, like you say, all these stories, the general public might think they like cast a bad light on science, but really they are science working properly, because when you keep doing science, you realize that these things are fake and you weed them out. A lot of people have this idea that peer review is about catching fakes, and it's really not. It's really just about checking if the methodology is sound. And so I really think it's interesting that all of science is just still based on a system of trust where we just don't expect people to fake things or to commit frauds. And when it happens, they get through, but then we figure it out later because of how science works.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have to assume honesty. Nobody gets into science for money, or at least very few people get any money out of science. So we have to kind of assume honesty and trust people. But the way that science works, in that you have the academic system of each new finding is built on by further findings. If one of the it's like an inverted pyramid, essentially, where it kind of each new discovery sort of...
It's not a pyramid scheme.
It's an inverted pyramid scheme. And so if you have a dodgy bottom, essentially, then that will at some point collapse under the weight of new findings, because it just won't hold enough water.
And this can all be brought back to the Graham Hancock bullshit, all that stuff again, because his main claim is that academics, that we don't believe anything, we're closed-minded, and we shut it off. Well, then we'd never get tricked by fakes, and we'd miss a lot of true things too, right? If we were so closed off. So we have to be open to it, or else,
Yeah, we believe everything that's published until we have our minds changed, essentially. Yeah. But yeah, you're trying to get us dedunked again, Kim. We're going to get called basic bitches.
Those people have not made it this long into this episode.
No.
Something cultural that we can see in both of these movies is some kind of attitudes towards homosexuality, and this is something I don't have knowledge of so far back, because there's a lot of discourse about how film and TV sort of influences our attitudes towards homosexuality, and a lot of this traces it back to like the 50s. And we can talk about like James Dean and stuff like this, and then we can see how the attitudes change over the years, and then we get this sort of crash during like the AIDS epidemic and stuff like this. But I don't think I've heard too much stuff about homosexuality in the early 20th century. And so we've got some weird stuff, like in the first movie, we've got this very robust caveman dancing in an effeminate way. And we also have the police officer being upset in the second movie when our two main characters are dreaming on the bench, and they're dreaming that they're making out with women, but they're actually making out with each other on the bench, right? So we have this sort of humorous use of homosexuality in both movies, but it's obviously homophobic, but it's not a type of homophobia that I'm really familiar with from most of the popular culture that I know of in more recent years.
I mean, I guess these are films that are before the Hays Code, which kind of came in and really stopped anything being even slightly risque. And so, before the Hays Code, you have, people nude in films. You have gay characters.
What's the Hays Code?
So the Hays Code was something, I think it was politically motivated it's essentially the same story that we're seeing today with, oh my God, Hollywood's a degenerate landscape full of debauchery and people having fun with no consequences. We can't have that. We must stamp it out. Here is a code. Your film will be censored if it doesn't adhere to this. And so, I only know about it from having a love of old comics like, EC Tales from the Crypt and stuff like that. And so the Hays Code applied to all forms of entertainment, including cinema. And so there was a massive list of things you couldn't show. So you couldn't suggest that married people, that people that were unmarried had sex. That you couldn't do that. No references to homosexuality, no references to bodily functions. Every film, the bad guy had to lose. You couldn't have ambiguous endings where the bad guy got away with bad stuff. They had to have their comeuppance at some point. And so I think it came in the 50s, I think.
It was 1934 to 1968.
Oh, right. Okay. So, yeah, 30s to the 60s. Essentially, it was, governmental censorship.
Yeah.
But before 1934, when it came in, things were, relatively free. We're just kind of blinded by the sort of tameness of that 30-year period, and I guess the difficulties in terms of finding surviving material. But it was there for sure. And so that's what makes me laugh when you always hear people talking about how Holly Weird and all these sort of debauched actors. But I mean, get a grip, guys. I mean, we've had moving cinema for 150 years, and you've always been trying to sort of tone it down. But that's just not. It's supposed to be a reflection of life, and life, however much you dislike it, is full of people who are gay, who are trans, who are different. That's what makes it interesting. We can't all just be suburban stay-at-home mums who go to church on Sundays. That's just that's not an interesting.
No, that's not a good
life to live.
It sounds like a boring TV show.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people get naked, and the human body is okay.
Absolutely. I think even sort of some of the early Marlene Dietrich films, they're very sort of open about their character being either bisexual or lesbian, and that was a big part of her appeal at the time, was that she was a kind of almost androgynous. Women wanted to be her, men wanted to be with her, but then also women wanted to be with her, and men wanted to be her too. So, all things to all people.
The other thing about the Hays Code ending in 1968 is this is why we see this sort of explosion in pornographic or like vaguely pornographic stuff in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And that's why we have on our watch list on Letterboxd so many 1970s caveman movies that are probably too much softcore porn for us to actually cover.
Just testing the waters, pushing the boundaries.
Like When Women Had Tails, 1970, Creatures of the World Forgot, 1971. So we have 1966 is Raquel Welch in her fur bikini, which is in the Hays Code period, and that's probably as far as you could push it at the time. And then a few years later, based on the popularity of that film and the loosening of the Hays Code, you probably have people making a whole bunch of caveman movies and then pushing it further in the 1970s.
When Women Had Tails has 3.8 out of 10 on IMDb. That's actually pretty high.
Better than most of the things we do.
What was the one we watched where it was Italian that had a title similar to that?
When men carried clubs and women played ding dong? Is that what it was called?
This one is Italian as well.
When Women Had Tails, I believe, is in the same series. I think When Women Had Tails is the first one, and then When Men Carried Clubs and Women Played Ding Dong was the second one, and then When Women Lost Their Tails is the third. It's kind of a loose trilogy, I believe.
Okay.
So we watched it out of order.
Yeah, I know.
It's okay.
I don't remember there being any plot at all, so that's probably fine.
The plot was a classic Greek play, Lysistrata.
Oh, that's right.
I remember. That's why we had the Greased Lightning podcast on to talk about that
good
one.
That they knew something about it, because I did not get that.
Well, do we have anything else to say about these two silent films?
No, except maybe that Charlie Chaplin was a sketchy guy.
But have you seen pictures of him when he's not in costume, without like the mustache and the hat and everything? He is handsome.
Oh dear, that does not excuse it, Kim. But yes, I agree. He's a good-looking fellow, but he had a string of marriages to like 16-year-olds, like not just one.
Did he?
Yeah.
Oh.
And all sorts of kind of paternity suits and stuff.
Oh no.
Yeah, very, very dodgy. But he did also holiday in Nairn, which is about 20 minutes away from where I'm sitting just now. So he used to take his holidays in the north of Scotland.
Ugh, what a creepo.
Yeah.
Well, we have lots of other silent film era movies. That's a weird way to say it. We have lots of other silent films on our watch list here. I wanted to get a Buster Keaton film in here for a sort of triple feature, but Buster Keaton has a movie called 3 Ages of which one of those ages is the Stone Age. But it's actually almost a feature-length movie, so we might need to do that one on its own. But there are lots of other, short films, like 10 or 20 minutes with cavemen. So we could do more episodes like this if people are interested in more black and white silent film caveman movies.
Yeah, so I guess if you're listening, let us know.
Yeah.
Also, like and subscribe, rate and review, all of that.
I don't know which Charlie Chaplin films I've seen, but
Modern Times.
I don't know what the names were because the context in which I've usually seen Charlie Chaplin films is at the Manitoba Museum in Winnipeg. There is an exhibit which is a reconstruction of Winnipeg from 1919. And it's really cool. You can walk through the streets and go into all the shops.
Oh,
and
one of
them is a little movie theater. And it's set up to play Charlie Chaplin on a loop. So you can, as you're walking through the museum, walk into the movie theater, sit down, and just watch Charlie Chaplin films as long as you want.
Cool.
And so that's where I've seen them, and that's where I know some of them are very good. His physical comedy is really good. So this is not a great example of Charlie Chaplin. If you've been enjoying Screens of the Stone Age, get in touch with us. Follow us on Twitter at SOTSA_podcast and on Facebook at SOTSA podcast, or send us an email to screensofthestonage@gmail.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out more at pasc-scpa.ca.